Welcome to the week that was, but we mostly wish it wasn't, for the week ending October 10th, 2025. This is a weekly roundup of the highlights and lowlights of campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. This week, I had about 45 stories to choose from. If something is happening in your neck of the woods, please be sure to let me know. I'm your host, Andrew Pessin. I'm a professor. Please don't hate me. For more about me and my work, visit andrewpessin.com. For all the details of today's stories and loads more stories, please follow me on X at Andrew Pessin. Obviously, the big news this week is the ceasefire deal, but there was still plenty happening on the campus scene. At Case Western Reserve University, some dozen anti-Israel activists there are required to pay back $350,000 in restitution for the damages they caused from a November 2024 incident in which they smeared red paint all over campus. More importantly, this past week was a big week because of the October 7th anniversary. There were commemorations all over the place where the Jewish students, primarily Jewish students who were commemorating and mourning the October 7th massacre. On the other side, the anti-Israel folks were commemorating the Al-Aqsa flood, the massacre itself, in a positive way. There were events at dozens and dozens of different schools with open celebration of the massacre and calls for more. I'll just give a few highlights and what's to come here. Many of these would fall into my students openly supporting violence category, but of course this week it's the top news. So there was a Harvard graduate student was filmed speaking to a New York City crowd that featured Hamas flags, and he was saying October 7th was not enough. We must do more. At the University of North Carolina, the SJP and Muslim Student Association there officially sponsored a full week of activities. I would call that a hate week, basically targeting Jews on campus. That included holding a vigil for our martyrs, by which they are referring, of course, to the Hamas terrorists, and a tribunal against Zionists. They were actually planning to put on a tribunal against Zionists on their campus. Columbia University, Columbia for Palestine, which is basically their Students for Justice in Palestine group, openly celebrated the October 7th massacre, not even remotely trying to hide it. So they're messaging this week, quote, today we honor the second anniversary of the heroic Al-Aqsa flood, end quote. We're celebrating, quote, escalating guerrilla resistance in the West Bank, over 80 guerrilla operations recorded, at least 47 Israelis killed and 470 wounded. This included a notable ambush in August 2024 and celebrating an October 2024 attack when two Palestinians killed seven Israelis in Tel Aviv and wounded dozens of others. End quote. This is their own words. They also praised Hezbollah operations, Iran's ballistic missiles, and closed by quoting Sinwar, quote, my will, do not lay down your weapons, do not throw away your stones, do not forget your martyrs, and do not compromise on a dream that is rightfully yours, end quote. My question, of course, is how is this allowed on a college campus? But then again, the answer is Columbia University. Stanford SJP held an October 7th rally to honor our martyrs, i.e., praise Hamas. Sarah Lawrence College SJP openly endorsed the Hamas October 7th terrorists. They also were honoring their martyrs, and they illustrated that with an image of hang gliders, homicidal hang gliders in blood red, in case anything was unclear. CUNY SJP, along with Within Our Lifetime, orchestrated a flood walkout for Gaza to commemorate October 7th. Harvard SJP did daily vigils this past week to honor the, quote, 700,000 people murdered by Israel, end quote. Talk about just fact-free making up of numbers, but of course we wouldn't expect much else from Harvard University, would we? Illinois State University SJP put on a second week of rage this week to support Gaza and Hamas. The national SJP organization, in particular at Tufts and Georgetown and Ohio State, have been publishing posters that personally target university board members under the slogan, quote, break the butchers. This, of course, is an escalation tactic that blurs the line between protest art and calls for direct action against the private citizens. These visual images mirror wanted or hit list campaigns, and they are quite frightening and intimidating to look at. They are sort of these dark images, and the person's face is big, and they have the eyes crossed out, and the person looks very sinister. And of course, they're being called butchers. So, how is that just open silence would be my question. Similarly, at the University of Virginia, National SJP was targeting board member there with a similar poster. Again, that theme of break the butchers. And also at the University of Maryland, which has been the scene of a few things the past couple of weeks. The student government just passed a BDS resolution last week on Yom Kippur, when Jewish students were mostly unable to attend. This week, they published a Board of Butchers poster circulating it online, depicting the many regents of the universities with red X's on their faces under the label Hall of Shame. And so there's about a dozen faces in this, and the red X's over the eyes are really quite sinister. And once again, they're all butchers, the Board of Butchers. Again, how is that not incitement to violence against these people? University of Southern California, USC, the anti-Israel group did a walkout on classes to commemorate the October 7th massacre, demanding, as usual, divestment, end of study abroad programs in Israel, and also demanding the end of the sale of dead bodies to the IDF. Apparently, that is a thing. There's some sort of program about that. University of Colorado, Boulder, their SJP also openly supported violence with the commemoration of October 7th, with messaging saying, quote, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon, end quote, and victory to the resistance. So half the time they're complaining about genocide, the other half of the time they're proclaiming the victory of the resistance. Canada, unpleasant this past week. Concordia University also held a celebration to glorify the largest mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. They had a poster with absolute open celebration of the October 7th slaughter. It was images of mass Palestinians rampaging violently. That led to major disruptions on the campus as the pro-Hamas individuals hijacked campus and began disrupting classes, etc. The Concordia ended up having to close down its campus due to the disorder. A couple of students were arrested, one with a metal bar and incendiary devices. Meanwhile, at McGill University in Montreal, riot police had to march through the campus to maintain order there. The University of Toronto Student Union also held an Honor Our Martyrs rally on October 7th. And then lastly, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights this week opened an investigation, not into the anti-Semitism at universities, but into how President Donald Trump's administration has been responding to the allegations of anti-Semitism at Columbia and at least a dozen other universities. In the lawsuit's legal department, a federal judge this week dismissed Israelis' lawsuit against the UN committee that operates the Palestinian Refugee Assistance, UNRWA. The lawsuit was filed alleging that UNRWA had open complicity, including many of its members actively participating in the October 7th massacre. The federal judge has dismissed the lawsuit, claiming that the agency has immunity, given that it's an organ of the UN. There are plans to appeal that decision. And finally, in the naughty professors department, visiting Harvard law professor this week was arrested for firing a pellet gun at a synagogue on Yom Kippur. Harvard has placed him on leave. He's also apparently affiliated at the University of Pennsylvania in some way. He claims he didn't know it was a synagogue. People are questioning whether that is believable. Sheridan College, which I think is in Canada, and also Rutgers University, a professor from Sheridan who is affiliated with the Rutgers Law School Center for Security, Race, and Rights, who is also a major DEI person and available for freelance DEI work in case anybody's interested, this week openly justified the murders at the synagogue in Manchester in the United Kingdom, putting up a post arguing that synagogues are places for, quote, indoctrination for Zionism, end quote, and are also, quote, corporate sources of funding for Israel, end quote. So basically, every Jewish house of worship, which expresses the long-standing Jewish connection to the land of Israel, is now a place of indoctrination for Zionism and therefore a legitimate target for murder. Uh, just a note, the Rutgers Law School Center for Security, Race, and Rights, in case you're wondering about that, its affiliated faculty are a long list of the true who's who of Israel haters in the academy. All the famous professors who despise Israel are affiliated there. And that's the news, unfortunately. Tune in next week to see what fresh horrors next week will bring. Again, I'm your host, Andrew Pessin at andrewpessin.com, and hoping everyone manages to keep it together until next time, and hopefully next time we will be celebrating the return home of many or most or maybe even all of the hostages. Have a good week.